Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, and welcome back to Frames of Space. One of the things that I found so interesting about the culture these days is declining trust in institutions, declining trust in society as a whole, and the way that it's made us a lot more sequestered and cloistered off. So today's guest is Jessica Grose. Jessica Grose is an opinion writer for the New York Times. And in this episode, I had the pleasure of being able to talk to her about how American education has been changing over the past few years, and how education and other institutions alike have been affected by the culture that we see nowadays. So when it comes to American education, we talk a lot about the effect of things like school closures or conservative arguments in favor of school choice, as well as with the advent of the incoming Trump administration, we talk a little bit about how Trump might affect education. But another thing that I find so fascinating about this conversation is later on when we get to talk about increased cynicism towards institutions, which is something that I think you see a lot of in the culture these days. And we talk a lot about how increased cynicism affects so many different aspects of the culture that we see in our day-to-day lives. It affects the decline in fertility rates worldwide. It affects the ways that we've become a lot more cloistered off when it comes to how social media algorithms allow us to pick and choose the aspects of the culture that we are the most interested in. And we try to find different flavors of that in terms of trying to interpret why people ended up voting for Trump. Because yes, we do a little bit of punditry about why people voted for Trump towards the end, when there's a little bit of an election post-mortem going on right now, when all the different kinds of Democratic pundits are throwing their own takes. They're throwing their own takes into this metaphorical goblet of fire, I would call it, in terms of them all giving their own hot takes about why Democrats lost and what people need to do. So we do speculate a little bit there. But one thing that I found really, really interesting about this conversation is the nature of my guest today, because Jessica Grose is someone that I think has a lot of interesting seeming contradictions to her worldview, which permeates a lot of her political commentary. For example, she is a cynic, but she describes herself as one of the most optimistic cynics around. She is a liberal, but she is a liberal who lives her life like a small-c conservative, which is something she talks about quite a bit later on in the episode. And I think that those apparent contradictions are what make this discussion all the more interesting, and I hope that you find it interesting as well. Hope you enjoy. Hi. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm guessing when you said you had a deadline moved up, you were talking about the piece that went up today, right?
No, not that one. We're that I usually write 2 days ahead of so that piece I was editing yesterday, and then because of the Thanksgiving holiday here in I don't are you American or are you Canadian?
I'm a US expat to
Okay, so
Canada.
then I always just because obviously Canadian Thanksgiving is a different date because of the
Yeah.
holiday coming up. We do this giving guide every year, and so I had to file that early because everybody like people are just not going to be around next week. So boring
Yeah.
administrative detail.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you mind if I included that boring administrative detail in the final product just for kicks? Um,
No, go for it. But please do link your listeners to Emma's Torch, which is the charity that I am recommending, and they help. They run a kitchen that is staffed by recent immigrants and refugees, and they teach them culinary training and help them find jobs in the restaurant industry here in New York and in DC.
Emma's Torch. That sounds really cool. Um,
I really love what they do because, you know, that one of the big problems when people come to a new country is getting a job. And so they really help them embed in the city in a really wonderful way. And some of their graduates have started their own restaurants already. So it's really cool.
Yeah. All right. Totally unrelated question that is also completely unrelated to any of the questions that I'll ask you after this. Um, which medium do you think does a better job conveying nuance, podcasts or articles? Because I've gotten into a lot of arguments with people about this. Um,
That's a great question. I think this is going to be such a wiggle answer. I think it depends. I think that um, what's great about podcasts is their conversation, and written articles can provide links to other stories, which can provide additional nuance, right? That a conversation cannot convey. But there is something about a conversation and people finding common ground and asking follow-up questions in real time that provides additional support and satisfaction, I think. So I think it depends is my answer.
yeah. So I guess you could say articles are better in terms of like casting a wide net in terms of like providing all the sort of links that you would and all the rabbit holes you would want to go down in that way. But like for podcasts, you can at least like drill down on one very specific podcast and cover a level of depth that you wouldn't be able to do accurately in an article.
Yeah, and I think I mean, what I like about being on podcasts and the medium in general is it is intimate. And I think that there is something about hearing two humans connect that provides a kind of nuance that just sort of reading text, it's not the same. And that's sort of a higher level thing. That's not saying that it's almost even hard for me to articulate, but do you know what I mean? It's like hearing actual
Yeah.
human embodied voices, I think does something for you.
It feels more
Um,
personal in a way.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess let's try to keep that in mind. Jessica Grose, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So you made some guest appearances on Matter of Opinion in the past few months. So first of all, I thought you did a fabulous job. And second of all, there was one guest appearance where you were talking about yourself, and you said something that yeah, you said something that I thought was kind of interesting in that you described yourself as like a small C conservative in a lot of the ways that you live your life personally, even if your like political ideology might skew a little bit more left leaning. So could you talk about that a little bit and how that affects your writing and stuff?
Absolutely. So what I mean by that is I am very risk averse and I live a very traditional life in a lot of ways. I met my husband in my early 20s. We got married in our 20s. We started having kids on the young side now for urban professionals in the United States. I think family dinner is the most important thing I do every day. I live a very sober life, but I think the reason that politically I am a liberal is because I don't think that the way that I live my life is necessarily the best or only way to live a life. I think it is a good way to live a life. I wish that people would be more responsible than they are and more thoughtful about how their actions affect the other people in their lives. But I also don't think that the government should be in the business of of making a ton of rules about how people live their lives, because I think it can quickly spin out of control into authoritarianism. I think obviously we need laws, we need rules. We can't have people out murdering each other. I am definitely not.
Yeah. We don't want
Uh,
people to get like an axe and just like start hitting people with it.
Exactly. I believe very strongly in the rule of law. So I'm not someone who thinks prisons should be abolished. I would never say that or believe that makes any sense. But I do think in general, the government should be out of the business of legislating how people live their lives.
Do you think that that line of argument could be used to advance some conservative like reasoning for school choice?
So, you know what? I am not against school choice philosophically. My opposition to school's choice is impracticality. So if you look at a state like Arizona, where there has been a lot of school choice and they've spent a lot of money and given a lot of vouchers, it's bankrupting that state. So, is there a financially sustainable way to help parents get their kids a good education? And to my mind, the best way so far we've come up with is public school. And if I thought that vouchers were providing more people with a better path to an education that fit their children, that was financially sustainable, I would be supportive of that. But I think what private schools can do is reject all the hardest cases. And so, for a society that has a baseline of education, you need that system to be public because otherwise, kids who have the most needs, both financially and educationally, who's going to serve them? I don't think you're going to find any institutions that are even remotely affordable willing to serve them. And so to me, philosophically, I absolutely am empathetic to school choice because, people who I think describe themselves as liberals and like love public schools, a lot of them moved specifically to a place that had good public schools. And so I understand why I don't think it's acceptable to just tell everyone, oh, just deal with whatever is the school you're assigned to and it's all fine when, that school is unacceptable to them. So as a parent, I philosophically support it. I don't think anyone has come up with a way that I have ever seen that is financially sustainable. And so if you're a conservative, I guess like conservative doesn't even mean anything anymore because of Trump's leadership. But it's like if I saw a plan that was a school choice plan that was financially sustainable, I would be really interested to see that implemented. But have you seen one that it doesn't bankrupt a state?
I have not, but yeah, so I would love to get into like Trump's leadership and what that entails later on in the episode.
Do we
But
have
for
to?
yes, I'm making that like a personal mandate of mine. But anyway, so like we're several years down since the advent of the pandemic, and like in the past, the two of us have bashed school closure, I think, because it deserves to be bashed. But like right now in very late 2024, what would you say is like the status quo when it comes to like the baseline quality of American education?
Um, it's really not good. But it's hard to make a lot of generalizations because everything is so localized, right? The what schools look like in Massachusetts and what they look like in Arkansas and the rules around them and the standards around them are pretty different. And so I think broadly we can say that chronic absenteeism is still a huge problem, that kids really being behind academically is still a problem. I think that, you know, behavioral issues and kids being behind behaviorally is sort of a side part of that it is probably potentially more of a problem because if the behaviors in your class are unmanageable, then that's your number one problem every single day if you're a classroom teacher.
And it's a lot harder to quantify. It's not something that you can look at like through data sets. It's just like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So I think all those things are still big problems. I don't want to be completely doomer. I do think that many places have rebounded. I think different communities of kids need different solutions. And, I have heard stories of really impressive rebounding. I think I was just looking at doing a story about schools in Kansas City because they have successfully done school closures because they have a declining population. And so a lot of northern cities are going to have to do this going forward because they're not going to have enough kids to fill the schools because of population shifts. So they've actually done that successfully, and the quality of their schools has not significantly dropped. And, they've been able to repurpose those buildings in a way that is, good for the community. Again, like I have not fully reported this. I've just read like a couple articles about it, so I don't want to like overstate whatever it is, and have someone from Kansas City being like, actually, they're terrible.
Yeah.
I think that there are hopefully some bright spots, and I don't think I think it's definitely better than it was 2 years ago for sure. So plus minus.
Plus
Uh,
minus. Yeah.
Still not good. Teachers are really burnt out. You know what? Actually, if you ask me, what I think the biggest thing that I'm worried about is the teacher pipeline drying up, because it is not a job that a lot of college students want to go into, and so I think um, that's something I would like to see any administration focus on, because if you don't have enough teachers, that's we can't even talk about what schools they're teaching at. Like it's like it's going to be a problem for everyone. So the teacher pipeline is something that I think is a hopefully nonpartisan thing that people can get behind.
Yeah, but like the whole thing about how it's hopefully a nonpartisan thing that people can get behind. So you wrote a piece a while back about how like both Democrats and Republicans don't really have like a clear, robust plan to improve American education. So what do you think are some of the current ideological differences between liberals and conservatives when it comes to how they view education? And where do you think,
Well,
go ahead.
oh no, go on.
Yeah, like A, do you think there is more room for common ground than than it seems? And B, do you think that there's like some other part of your thesis that I'm currently missing out on?
I think that there is a lot of potential common ground, because while each party has some things in their platform, I think that there's a lot of heterodoxy in terms of what parents actually want. Um, and so I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to come together and kind of make common sense adjustments for what makes sense for them, given whatever the local issues are on the ground. Because I mean, roughly, Democrats want whatever the teachers' unions want, and Republicans want to privatize education. And I actually think uh, parents don't really want either of those things,
Yeah.
regardless of their political affiliations. I think they really want the core education, like the basics, really buttoned up, and then, that's it. And their kids to have a roughly good experience and to be safe in their classrooms. Um, and I think a lot of the stuff that makes headlines is not stuff that parents want to focus on in their day to day. They don't want book banning. They don't care what their schools are named. They want focus on their kids.
Yeah, like they just want their like to know that their kids can like have a safe place to learn these things well and not like I guess they also don't want to suffer another year and a half of lockdowns where like their schools will get closed again.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of soul searching in the coming months, because I think education is something that Democrats want to be leaders on. And so, hopefully they will come up with some winning messaging and winning ideas that convince parents, and people who broadly care about education, that they should still trust them on this topic.
yeah. And I hope they do, but like given the results of the 2024 election, like what effect do you think Trump will have on American education?
I can't. I am out of the prediction business. But I will say, in the piece that I wrote about it, I said, hey, I don't think he really cares enough about it to break it. So he has talked a lot of game about, removing the Department of Education, but that takes a 60 member Congress vote, and he doesn't have the votes. And I don't think that that's actually something. The polling I've seen on it suggests that 80% of Americans do not want to dismantle the Department of Education. So it's wildly unpopular. Um, I think what is sort of interesting to me about all of these sort of school issues, so take vouchers, for example, which, we've talked about already, are, part of the Republican Party platform. You know who hates them? People who live in rural America, teachers in rural America, legislators in rural America, because there are no private schools in most parts of rural America. So they're just taking from these community institutions, and like the public schools in, small towns, in far-flung towns, they are the center of the action. They're Friday night lights, they're football games. It's like they are community centers. And so there is no energy into taking money away from these these institutions that are central to how communities function. So that's what I mean, where I say, like, currently there's, I think, a lot of alliances to be made that are divorced from whatever our two-party limitations are right now.
Yeah. But I guess when it comes to like all those different alliances that theoretically could be made, and like I guess the mood is that like a lot of people feel kind of tapped out with a lot of what's going on in present day politics. What do you say? What do you say that during your time reporting on this issue, have you observed a loss in trust in societal institutions since the advent of the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I think being siloed, I really do think that we have to actually interact with each other, to um, tolerate each other. And I think everything going online and people really being able to cordon themselves off and fall down these rabbit holes and alienate themselves from other people, just, I can't think of anything that's been worse. But I do, again, it's like, I want to believe that we can come back from that. How? I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Like I think
Um,
it's just about muddling through and seeing each other and try to, you know,
yeah.
yeah, again, I got nothing for you. I don't know.
Yeah, but even if we don't know the solution, maybe we could do more to diagnose where the problem is coming from. Like,
Yes.
yeah, so I guess a question that might be insightful and might be dumb would be like, to what extent do you think the loss in societal trust might be causing declining fertility rates?
Uh, that's a great question. I've never framed it that way. I'm sure it has something to do with it. But I don't know. I don't know that you can um, draw a straight line to it, but
Maybe you could
you
draw
know,
like a zigzag line.
I mean, certainly if you don't think that society is good, you're not going to be really psyched about having children. And if you don't feel like, but I mean, you can make that argument, but then it's like people have had children in all sorts of adverse situations forever.
Yeah,
Like there were babies born in concentration camps. Like there's the human will to procreate is what it is. So I don't know that I would say that the loss of faith in institutions is necessarily a top reason, but is it part of the sort of tapestry of reasons? Sure.
yeah. But like, I guess when it comes to, there are a bunch of different, there's a huge tapestry of reasons that's causing fertility rates to go down. Do you think we as a society should be concerned with it, or do you think we should just like say like this is how it is?
I mean, I think we should be concerned about it, but I think all of the solutions that I've ever read dip into real government overreach in a way that frightens me. And you cannot, it's such an intimate choice, that I don't, that it's going to have to be sort of both a cultural shift, a societal shift. Something I think about a lot is conservatives talk about part of the problem is people aren't having kids young enough, right? But they don't, it is really, really hard to support a family in your 20s. And to create the governmental policies that would make it easier to support a family in their 20s, making housing cheaper, I think would be like the number one, or subsidizing it in some ways are anathema to conservatives. So like, I don't know. I mean, I just read a Heritage Foundation paper yesterday that suggested we stop educating people.
What?
And
Wait.
that's
Okay.
like their solution to the fertility problems. And I'm like, I don't think less education is the way. But you know,
Yeah.
I don't think that we know. Um, I don't think we know because, you know, even uh, societies like Hungary that have really paid a lot of money to their citizens to raise the birth rate, they've barely been able to make it tick up. And I would not describe that as a liberal democracy. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think anyone has any answers.
Yeah, but you did mention how like the decision to have children is such like an intimate choice, and like that's something that's worth reckoning with. It kind of reminded me of the guest appearance that you made in Matter of Opinion. You gave this one anecdote about yourself that really stuck with me about how you originally wanted three children and then you ended up having two. So like
Mhm.
A, would you be comfortable telling that to our audience? And B, do you think that's affected your view on the fertility debate?
Absolutely. I'm happy to tell that story. So my husband was one of three kids. I'm one of two kids. I always wanted a big family. My family is pretty small. You know, I don't have a lot of cousins. And when my husband and I got married, he has this huge family. His dad is one of five and his mom is one of four. And I just love them so much. And I was like, three kids sounds great. I would love to have three kids. And we started early enough where that was totally possible. But I had a really difficult pregnancies. I had hyperemesis, which is severe morning sickness. So I just was could not hold food down for months on end. And then I had my daughter, and she was perfect. And I really loved being a mom. I loved having babies, which I think is unusual. Like, I really don't like being pregnant, but I love babies. And even the like infants and the non-sleeping part. And then I had a miscarriage between my two girls. And then I had my daughter, Lila. And with my second pregnancy, it was my third pregnancy, my second, you know, pregnancy that came to term. You know, I was again really sick, and towards the end of that pregnancy, I just realized I can't put my body through this again. It's too hard on me. And we were, you know, happy to have our two girls who were healthy, and we just sort of called it a day. And so, you know, I had to actually live through the reality of, you know, what happened to my body during pregnancy, what that was like, what our family felt like after two kids, to know that, you know, three just wasn't in the cards for us. And so I think there was no societal carrot that could have ever been dangled in front of me that would have been like, yes, and now I will have a third kid. It was just like, I could not put my body through that again. And so I think a lot of people are making those decisions about how many kids to have, whether to have kids on such a like intimate, personal level that it is really, really tough to have changes in society to encourage them to have that second kid, to have that third kid, because so many different things go into it. And we could have afforded to have a third kid for sure. I just, you know, it just wasn't the right choice for us.
Yeah. Like sometimes maybe the sentiment is that like in the present day, in order to have kids, like there are so many different stars that need to align.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And I do
Uh,
think, you know, I think my heart breaks for people who really want to have kids and it doesn't happen for them. That's so sad. And I am so empathetic to that. But the reason that I've seen cited the most in surveys is that they just haven't met the right person. Um, and so I don't know if I could help them meet the right person, I would love to do that. But I just don't know what are the societal changes that would have to happen to have more people um, get there.
yeah. And like, did people get there more in the past, or did they like get there at like equally low rates, and like afterwards they just felt pressure to like find someone that they weren't a good fit with? That's also
Um, I think, I mean, marriage just used to be more compulsory and there were a lot of really bad marriages. That's what people don't want to talk about. Um, so that's, I don't like, we have to reckon with that. Like, I wrote a column last year and I think it was called like good marriages are good, bad marriages are bad, or something like that. It's
Yeah.
like I don't think marriage is a sort of unalloyed good all the time. So it's like easy for me to be like, yes, everyone should get married because I love being married and it's worked out for me. Like, I can't say that.
Yeah. But maybe it's important to reckon that like not all marriages are good, but then like you it's best to like simultaneously acknowledge that while also acknowledging like Melissa Kearney's thesis about a lot of the economic benefits that come with two-parent
Yeah, I
families.
mean, of course, but like you can't manufacture good marriages. So, and tell people, you should stay with this horrible person because it will, this economist says that it's going to accrue benefits to your family. Like it just doesn't
Yeah.
work like that.
Yeah. Yeah, this like it's it's very hard to have these debates in a way that is like simultaneously like cognitive of both like the economic effects and like the normative effects at the same time.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and I think it's hard, like it's even hard to like make cultural arguments because it's like, what is culture even anymore? Everything is so siloed and personalized. It's
everything
like,
is so much more diffuse than it was even 10 years ago.
exactly. So it's like I see that argument too. It's like, oh, people are too negative about marriage and parenting, and I'm like, every show I see has like the marriage plot and Hallmark show like it's we're talking right before Thanksgiving and
American
everything
Thanksgiving, yeah.
American Thanksgiving. Everything on my Netflix recommendations queue is a Hallmark Christmas movie where the entire plot is people getting married. Like I just am like, we live in a marriage negative culture. We do like that's not like I yes, I'm sure there's some, people on TikTok saying like marriage is death. I hate it. It's terrible. But like I still think the dominant culture is very or my impression of it is very pro marriage. So
All right, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate just a little bit, not on the anti-marriage part, but maybe on the anti-parent part. So I
yeah.
remember, so are you familiar with the book by Rachel Wiseman and Anastasia Berg about like having children? Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So I remember getting them onto my podcast, and one thing that they said that sort of stuck out in my mind is that like they watched a bunch of different movies and TV shows, and they weren't able to find like a single example of like the main character being a mother and like it being portrayed in an aspirational way. Do you know? So like, can you think of any like popular movies or shows where like the main character is a mother and like their role as a mother is portrayed like aspirationally?
Yes Day, and there's a bunch of Netflix movies for families that star Jennifer Gardner that are portray motherhood as extremely positive and aspirational. She's always living in like a huge Los Angeles mansion with her like perfect kids and her like the movie Yes Day in particular. I can't remember what the second one she made was called. It's like a body swap Freaky Friday type of movie, but Yes Day is like she just decides like I'm gonna say yes to everything my kids want for a day.
Oh,
And it is
that sounds very interesting.
yeah, it's like sweet. My kids really liked it. And it does not it definitely makes it seem like focusing on your kids and, creating and their needs is super rewarding. And makes connection possible. So, I think certainly like I read their book. I think that they have I appreciate their scholarship. I think that they have a very ivory tower view of entertainment.
Yeah, but maybe like even an ivory tower view of entertainment, even if it's wrong with respect to culture generally, it's correct about how the ivory tower views entertainment. Maybe it's correct about how like academics view these types of family things, even if it's not how the broader culture views it.
It's true, but how do you square that with the fact that like the people who are most likely to be living in normie conservative families like mine are college educated. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you, like, if it's all so negative and we're all told, like, oh, don't do it. Like, well, a lot of us still seem to be doing it.
I'm sure that I could like say something. I'm sure that like if I was more quick to my feet, I could come up with some kind of like analogy related to luxury beliefs as a way to like rebut that. Yeah. Uh,
So, like, I don't, I think also it's like a lot of people say have a lot of goofy beliefs in their early 20s that they then realize have more, they get more life experience and they realize like I've changed or I
yeah.
was fighting against a thing that like I actually isn't so bad or you
I
know what I
don't
mean?
think we
Like
should abolish prisons anymore. Like that's
right, right. Like
yeah.
I don't think it's bad to be utopic or unrealistic when you're young. Like I'm a hardened, cynical shell. Like it's not, don't be like me. Like
Yeah.
I'm
I
just kidding. I always call myself like the most optimistic cynic around, because I
yeah.
do believe in the ultimate goodness of most people. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think, I mean, I think a lot of the problem with the discourse is that like silly, goofy ideas that are on X have a international audience of millions where like that's an idea that should have traveled to three people and is
Yeah.
not really that representative of many like these are not broadly representative ideas. And so I think, I don't know how to deal with that challenge because we live in a social media environment and that's never going away.
Yeah.
Um, but that's, it's what it is.
I guess the problem arises when those goofy beliefs being spread out into like a much larger audience than they deserve to be. I think the problem arises when that becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy where like the prominence of their like count on Twitter ends up having those like goofy beliefs catch a lot more mainstream attention. Um, do you think that like could be a potential concern when it comes to like certain messages around family or culture, or do you think that's still too ivory tower of a
I
critique?
don't think it's too ivory tower. It's just, I really do believe that the most influential people are the ones that you're actually seeing in your day-to-day life. And so if your parents had a good marriage, and you're seeing all your friends around you get married, you're going to want that too, regardless of a TikTok that you saw, right? And so I think, honest, like, this sounds so conservative of me, but the most important models in your life are probably your parents. So, um, and that's not to discount I'm not saying culture doesn't matter. It definitely matters. But it's not just like I watched these three TikToks and now I have completely changed my mind on my core belief system.
Yeah,
Like,
okay. Just to push you a little bit further, maybe it's like I watched these three TikToks and it's given me a permission structure to not listen to my parents as much as previous generations felt like they had to listen to their parents.
okay, I was just having this discussion with my colleague last night who is in I think he's in his 60s or 70s, and he was like, I lived through the 60s. This is nothing. Like, there was so much strife. One of my favorite books is called The Sky Belongs to Us, which was about how frequently planes were being hijacked. It's about skyjacking.
You're
Like,
you're
the
giving me
amount.
a field day about like what sources I'm gonna put in the show notes right now.
It's so good. I love it. It's just like, it's so well written. And it moves and it taught me about something that I had no idea about. Like I didn't live through that. I had no idea that there was, I mean, the amount of regular societal disorder that was going on in the late 60s all the way through the 70s. I think we can't, people who did not live through it cannot even understand what it was like. And all these, the rebellious young people of that era were so much more out of control than the rebellious young people of this era. That it's just like, we've seen this before, and this was before social media. So I don't know. I think mass movements and mass changes in society come from like so many different directions and media sources and behaviors and governmental choices and wars, and you know what I mean? Like I just always resist the easy explanation for these big changes. I mean, to me, the two biggest reasons why we have the declining birth rate around the world is birth control that really works and women being educated. And I think those two are both really good things for society
And
on net. And I will never be convinced otherwise. So, what do we do from here based on that? That's the question. But those two fundamental changes around the world, I would say, are really good. I am for them.
yeah, I guess maybe I could be so like maybe I'm so this is not a hill that I would die on, but like I would postulate that one thing that would not necessarily be bad to promote that might also increase fertility rates would be like more religious participation, which you can do without like going against birth control or going against women's education.
Well, the religions will have to stop going against birth control then. Like,
Okay, yeah, okay, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, I I feel really grateful to be someone who comes from generations of college educated women. And I don't take that for granted. And I understand that that shapes my worldview in ways that are not relatable to a lot of people. And I do try to really be mindful about that. But I see it as also an unalloyed good. I'm very, very grateful to have gotten the education that I have received and be able to be employed thinking and writing and reading. It is an absolute dream. I am grateful for it every day. And so, yeah, that's a sidebar, but
Yeah.
it is all part of the same thing. But at the same time, a lot of women, in tell me that they feel that they got the message that they should always put their career first. And if there's something that I would like to express, it's that you don't have to choose. You don't yes, establish your career, but the relationships and good relationships are really hard to come by. And so if there are, forks in the road in your life where you feel you have to choose, I don't think the default, it always has to be choose your career. I, I was lucky to meet someone that I felt I had a future with when I was 23. That is luck. I am grateful for that. But we grew together and we prioritized each other and the relationship and made choices together. And I think if there's one message that people are getting, I don't know where it's coming from because I think there's, I think
Something
there's
diffusion of culture. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it's like a lot of like, I'm sure there are feminists who said that. I am a feminist. I have never said that. I've never felt that. I think relationships and our family relationships, our relationships with our parents and our siblings and our friends, like they're really important. And romantic relationships, I don't think should be disposable when they're important to you. Like, yes, you should date casually for sure, but if you're in a relationship and it's a good one, like that should be a priority in your life. And I take people at their word when they say they feel they got the message that they should only prioritize their career and not think about marriage or children. So if there's one cultural shift that I would like to see, and I think it's possible, again, regardless of sort of political persuasion, it's that my you know I my marriage and my kids are definitely, if I had to choose, I would give up my career in a second, but I don't have to choose. It's great. I
Yeah.
get to do both.
Yeah. And like the goal is to get to the point where like your true like the whole thing about revealed preferences, the goal is to get to the point where you don't have to choose, you get to do what you want to do without feeling that much societal pressure in either direction.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Again, it's like I believe people when they talk about their lived experiences. So I'm not trying to dismiss that they're getting that message from somewhere. And
Yeah.
I mean, to go back to your question about the failure of institutions, I think part of the reason that some women might feel like they have to really put their career first all the time is because of financial precarity. And I get that, if you feel like you're always on the edge of, not being able to make ends meet, and you're worried that your partner is also always on the edge of being able to make ends meet, and you don't trust that in times of crisis, there will be a safety net for you to fall back on at all. That makes family formation pretty tough.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But maybe that's why it's worthwhile to at least acknowledge the fact that like people who do form families often have an easier time economically, regardless of whether that's the right like message for individuals where it doesn't work for them.
For
Um,
sure. But it's like, again, like it goes back to like the number one reason people say that they don't have kids is because they haven't met the right person. And I don't know
yeah,
how to make that happen. I love
yeah,
love. I would love everyone to meet their right person. I'm a sap deep down. It's
yeah,
probably why my whole Netflix algorithm is Hallmark movies, because I am deep down a sap and a romantic.
yeah. Do you think like maybe so one of the things that you mentioned that kind of stuck out to me is like when you talk to people who grew up in the 60s and they experienced how much turmoil there was back then and like what's happening right now is nothing compared to that. So I know yeah, so I'm really sorry but we have to do this. To what extent do you think the upcoming Trump administration is going to affect culture and like in terms of like bringing in a lot more tumult and turmoil?
So I have a positive feeling, which again, you can replay this for me in 6 years when I'm in jail, and like I will not be like, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But I actually am sort of hopeful that there'll be like an actually interesting counterculture now, because I think the sort of like overly earnest culture that emerged after his first administration was really boring. And I think people are fatigued by that and it's not interesting to them anymore. And so I'm hoping that, you know, we're still a super divided country. I hope that the people who make art will make like really interesting and provocative art because they feel, like almost a sense of nihilism, like nothing really matters anymore. So I'm just going to say some wild stuff and I'm going to make some wild movies and I'm going to make some wild art. So that's my optimistic cultural gloss.
Yeah.
That is that it might.
You're optimistic that people will be more nihilistic.
Yeah. And maybe make interesting art.
Yeah. Um, yeah, then I guess the question is like, to what extent is nihilism responsible for how we got here? Like, to what extent is like nihilism what causes people to believe in like maybe people who support Trump are a lot more likely to be cynical about institutions.
Yeah, I mean, they are, but they also just love him. Like, that's the thing. It's like they really love him. They
But
feel he speaks to them.
what about the COVID moms that like you interviewed that were like solidly Democrat, but like probably sat out the recent election because of like how much they like lost faith in Democrats? Do you think they love him?
No, but I'm saying he has a 25, 20. So I don't know how much of his vote count is people who love him, but like a lot of people really freaking love him. So like and they believe that he will fix the institution. I think they don't think he's going to destroy all of them. There are people who are excited about RFK Jr. because they think he's going to make the water cleaner and fix the health system. That is whether or not they believe that it is institutional trust. That's putting actually a lot of institutional trust in the government.
Yeah.
So I think that he obviously operates on a frequency that I can't hear.
Yeah.
Like it's like it is anathema to me in so many ways, but like I understand that and that's like why I find a lot of the conversations around him to still be missing the point. Like they love him, they love everything he does, like they're entertained by him, they trust him, and there's nothing that I say or that anybody who doesn't like him says that is going to change that and shake that. He is an institution at this point. He
I
has
think
dominated the political landscape for 10 years.
I think it applies to like at least 25% of the people who voted for him.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably like an equally large contingent of people who voted for him because of the people that say like, oh, like they're all crooks, like when or like politicians are all corrupt, so why should we care about him?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
But I mean, I think I do not hold most politicians in high regard. I mean, I live in a city governed by Eric Adams. Like, I don't feel great about it.
Yeah.
Like,
But like, do you think that like the level of cynicism that you have, maybe that's the wavelength that you can use to try to understand how like some parts of the electorate ended up voting a lot more Republican this time around.
Oh, for sure. Like I totally understand it, and I don't blame some of them. Like I really don't. But you know, that I do think a portion of the people who did vote for him don't understand that there is only so much that governments can do to control inflation. Like inflation was a problem globally. We can quibble about whether Biden's handling of it was the best handling of it, but it does feel like to a large degree he is being punished for global inflation, and that's what it is. I'm like, I don't know how much energy I have for another election postmortem, but like the only fighting chance we would have had is if he had said in 2022, I am not running again, and we could have had an open primary and possibly elected somebody who could meaningfully distance themselves from his administration. That's a lot of what ifs. Still could have lost, but that
Yeah,
would have given at least a fighting chance, which, we
yeah.
clearly just weren't going to have.
Like Democrats could have just like nominated a straight white man and then still lost by the same margin for a little.
100%. And I think it would have been about how much they could meaningfully distance themselves from the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And
Um,
I don't know how possible that would have been. It really would have depended on who they were, and how, deeply embedded they were, and how much of were they more of a Bernie Sanders type who frequently broke with the administration and could prove it? And a lot of it, I think, at this point is really just about celebrity appeal. Obama is just cool. You look at him and he is cool, and people just liked him. And the same thing is with Trump. It doesn't like most people are not looking at the policy papers, right?
yeah.
I wish I didn't have to look at the policy papers. I am unfortunately contractually obligated to do so. They're boring. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's one of the benefits of podcasts is that you can say stuff like that on a podcast that you wouldn't be able to say in an article.
I feel
Um,
like I have said that I find policy boring in articles because I think most people do. Have you read
yeah.
those papers? They do not move. They are written in the thickest jargon imaginable. So, it's, I think it is an unusual person who reads policy for pleasure.
Yeah. Like they
Um,
have to be like a very, very specific type of introverted nerd. Um,
Yes, right,
yeah.
right. So like, yeah, I think that the way that the media is now, someone who comes across as authentic, whatever that means to people, um, that's going to be going to be the primary quality that you need going forward to win a presidential election. Considering the media environment and its fragmentation, the most important quality for any presidential candidate is authenticity, and whether voters find them authentic and that they are speaking to them.
Yeah. So I guess my take that I'll throw into the election postmortem goblet of fire is that I really do think that Kamala Harris should have gone on Joe Rogan.
I
Yeah.
think she should have too, but I don't think it would have helped her. And you
Yes.
know why? Because Trump could go on and talk about UFC and seem like a regular guy, and I do not know that she could meet him at that level.
Yeah. But
Like
even if
what?
like if she couldn't have met him at that level, and that's something that like maybe that's something that the audience and the Democratic like party deserve to know. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I don't think it would have. Like I agree that she should have gone on. I don't think it would have made a meaningful difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But it goes back to what I'm saying. Like, people did not like her because they found her to be inauthentic and phony. That was the number one thing that people said about her. And it's like they found her inauthentic because she changed her mind about a bunch of things. She wouldn't answer questions. And it's like, Trump does that all the time. Trump has never had a consistent policy, like, except about immigrants. He's flip flopped all day long. And it doesn't matter as much for him. And it's because people find him to be authentic. Like we ran an article about, um, you know, Trump supporters who just don't believe that he's going to do half the things he says he's going to do. So why is it a barrier for her and not for him? And it's because they find him to be real and authentic and someone who will fight for them, regardless of the fact that he has flip flopped on a million things. But they found her to be phony.
But
And
maybe
so
part of the reason why they see like Trump as authentic is because they see him as a cynic. Like
hmm.
Like maybe like all the stuff that like he says where he doesn't really have a coherent ideology, but that doesn't matter because his ideology was premised on cynicism, and that's what got people to gravitate towards him.
Maybe.
Yeah. Um, okay, so I guess so obviously like everyone has their own like election postmortem. Um but I guess like do you have any like strong disagreements with a lot of the take havers in terms of how the Democratic Party should establish itself in the aftermath of this election?
No, I think we need to wait for better exit poll data because all the takes are based on the immediate exit poll data, which every pollster will tell you is garbage. Like it's not good. Every pollster says this is not good. It will be corrected like pretty radically in like 6 months.
Yeah, wait
So
for the Pew Research Center to give accurate stuff.
yeah, so I would say wait for the actual data. We know that this was a very close election. Electoral collegially. That's not the way to say that.
Electorally, whatever, electoral college wise.
Yes, he electoral college ways, he had a real win for sure. Lot shifted in his direction, but at the end of the day, he had a 1% win.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how to win for sure. And I don't like saying we because I'm not a Democratic Party operative. I am a registered Democrat. Sometimes I consider becoming a registered independent, to be honest, like at this point, but that's another discussion. But I think Democrats need to take a breath. I think right now what I'm seeing is a lot of like who's the best to throw under the bus? Should we throw LGBTQ people under the bus? Should we throw this other group under the bus? And I don't think that's the right approach because you have a coalition that exists. And so you have to figure out how not to completely destroy that coalition while also attracting more people to it. If I knew the answer to how to do that, I would be a very rich woman. I don't have, I
Yeah.
mean,
Or if
because,
you were able to successfully pretend that you had the answer to do that.
right. So, I mean, I got the column I published today, I got frustrated with people saying, like, stop talking about sexism. The problem is that Democrats talk too much about sexism and they, have this, preachy females was what James Carville said. And women are Democrats' biggest base. Like, we are with you. And so I think it's not savvy to say that issues that matter to a lot of women are not what we should care about, first of all. So that's number one. But number two, a lot of the suggestions for things we should care about are things that Kamala Harris did talk about. The suggestions were, oh, you need to talk about more about apprenticeships, about construction jobs, about pathways to jobs that are not involve a 4-year degree. She talked about that all the time. It was in all of their party documents. They didn't believe her. That wasn't the messenger that was effective. But they talked about it a lot, and it was a big part of the platform. So, like, I don't know what then to do, right? Like, talk about it more effectively,
Or
have
like
some.
maybe
I think
talk. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, no, I do. I think immigration is a big deal, and the Democrats are going to have to figure out a way to talk about it that isn't just Donald Trump is a monster, because that's been their only way to talk about it. I'm not an expert on immigration at all. It's not a topic that I cover ever really, and so I would say like I'm not the person who has the winning message on immigration and what it should be, but obviously that was a huge thorn in their side, and they didn't have a coherent message. That's a huge problem. Figure it out. But I think throwing different parts of the coalition that exists under the bus to satisfy some mythical Andrew Tate fan is a mistake.
I think okay, so I guess I'm gonna throw like one last hot take into the post-election like moratorium goblet of fire thing.
Yeah.
I guess I do agree with Richard Reeves that the Democratic Party needs to do more to appeal to men. But I think one facet that he's like deliberately avoiding, but I think is like meant as the subtext, is that like they need to provide more, not just in terms of policy, but also in terms of culture, like being
Yes.
willing to speak their language. Um,
Yes.
yeah. And I think that that's something that they need to do a lot more of, which is why she should have been willing to go on Joe Rogan. And I think that the goal, which is very hard but worthwhile, is to like simultaneously acknowledge a lot of the ways that like women are under threat right now, while also being willing to do more to treat men as a marginalized group that they failed to do in the past.
But I do think that I do think that once Donald Trump is no longer this energy sucking void in the culture, it will be easier to do that.
Yeah, I feel
Because
like
so
the problem
to
with, sorry, go ahead.
no, to me, like, look, he has been credibly accused of sexual assault. He has a cabinet filled with people who have been credibly accused of sexual assault. I can't get past that. This is not Mitt Romney.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is not John McCain. This is not, yeah,
Right.
this is,
And
yeah,
so I think, what bothers me about the need to appeal and speak the language is the current language is really not good. I'm not saying I don't hate Joe Rogan. I listen to Joe Rogan when he has a comedian on that I like. I will listen to him. I have no beef with Joe Rogan. I do not think he's representative, and actually really bothers me that Joe Rogan is in the same conversation as Andrew Tate. I think they are very different, and I think it
yeah,
is too broad a brush to say that those are the same. Like they're not the same. Maybe they have some crossover in their fandoms. They're not the same. So I want to make that very clear. But I think because Trump is the avatar, that a lot of the discussion and male energy around him is so gross that Democrats don't want to play on that field. And I kind of can't blame them.
yeah,
And I am hopeful that once Donald Trump is no longer the candidate, and so there's someone else there who just doesn't say horrible things about women all of the time and is surrounded by people who say horrible things about women all of the time, we can communicate with each other better. I'm not even talking about like Democrat, like Republican, whatever. Like, I feel like there's just such a poisoning of the discourse, and we're locked in it in such a way that is like, it's just hard to break out of when he's the central figure.
yeah. I think one conclusion I drew from reading a lot of your articles about this is that I do think that Trump is a sort of like misogynistic black hole that makes it a lot like it makes it a lot harder for people who want to see these issues with nuance to like try to treat these issues in like a tactful way,
Yes.
because he like ends up like poisoning the discourse.
I would also push back a little bit on the like I think it is true that there are boys and men who need our help and we should care about their interests because they are part of society. Everyone is part of society. But colleges actually practice affirmative action on behalf of men. Like there are lower standards, especially at elite institutions, for male applicants because they want to balance the ratio. They want to balance the ratio. My colleague Susan Dominus has written about this. So it's like the picture is complicated. Like which men are we talking about? Which women are we talking about? Like I'm doing fine. I do not encounter sexism in like massively in my everyday day to day, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of societal structures that I think are keeping women behind that still need our attention. And I don't know that I am as convinced of the crisis of boys in quite the way that I think some other people are convinced.
Yeah.
Um,
But maybe like these are the types of hard conversations where like a lot of the time when people are making these arguments, trying to they're trying to like bring up something broader at at the culture that's kind of uncomfortable and is probably made even more uncomfortable by Donald Trump's misogyny, but like probably needs to be discussed more.
yeah, I mean, I think we can't, again, when he is the center of attention, it's really hard to have a productive conversation about this. And so, yeah, I look forward to the day that we can move past him as a political figure. But that
Yeah.
ain't today. That ain't
Yeah.
today. But again, the optimist part of me is like, It opens up coalitions that are potentially unexpected.
Yeah. But I
Because people
guess
are exhausted by the deadlock.
people are exhausted by the deadlock. I guess, yeah, I myself, I felt incredibly grateful for the ways that like mainstream institutions have become like gradually more willing to talk about like the struggles of boys and men. And I do hope that when Donald Trump is out of the picture, it becomes even easier to have productive conversations about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess final question. Where do you think, like, you know how you mentioned that you try to describe yourself as like an extremely optimistic cynic?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are some ways, like, what would you recommend to people who like are starting to feel a loss of trust in societal institutions, and like, what advice would you give them when it comes to like ways to see the world in like a healthy and productive way?
Get involved in your local community. Actually, whether it's your schools, clubs, you know, your block association, actually dealing with the problems in front of your face and the humans that are in proximity to you really helps. It really helps. That's the number one thing.
All right. Jessica Grose, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's always fun.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, make sure to follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts from. Until next time, goodbye.